at least one study suggests that, we've talked about some of the ways that, that putting yourself out there can be detrimental to your career. But at least in the life and physical sciences, there is one study that I found that suggests that it actually can possibly help your career. And this study, which was done in 2008, found that scientists mentioned in the popular press subsequently see an uptake in citations by colleagues in peer-reviewed journals, as journals cited in the Science Citation Index. Now again, this is mostly life and physical sciences, but I thought that was a very interesting finding. So, on the plus side, maybe Bill Cosby will call and try to make sure you don't get tenure. Something similar happened to my advisor. Before he had tenure, he ended up getting it, fortunately. Not with Bill Cosby calling, a legislator actually calling and asking if he had tenure. But on the other side, it's not necessarily good. It could have a good effect on your career. So I'd like to talk a little bit then about some of the additional reasons why people don't put themselves out there. And I think one of them is people are worried that their contact would attract criticism from their peers. Hopefully you'll think back to my argument that more people than you think actually are trying to put themselves out there. People also felt that, I think a lot of people felt that they weren't adequately prepared to make contact with the media, to write an op-ed. More than 90% of people in this study, this is a 2008 study, found that they said that most scientific training just doesn't adequately teach those who go on to academia to have contact with the media. So that's something to think of with your doctoral students. Is there media training available? Do they know how to use Twitter? Do they know how to use, do they know how to use social networking? Can they distill their findings into a very readable piece that might make a nice op-ed? And so people felt, so a lot of academics felt very uncomfortable going to the media. They went to the media, but they felt uncomfortable doing so. However, a majority agreed with the statement that scientists are just as responsible for making their research findings to the public as they are for making the results available to their colleagues. And 97% agreed that it is important for scientists to learn how to discuss the research in terms that are clear to non-scientists. So, I want to sort of conclude by handing out a brief sort of, and in many ways, I call it a sort of a no-shit Sherlock type of explanation of some things that you can do to make your work a little bit more accessible. And when you see it, a lot of the things are sort of, well, of course, but hopefully, maybe you'll take away one or two things that you didn't think of before. So let me go ahead and hand that out. And so I think some of the more interesting things are some of the suggestions that I took from an article in a book called Communicating Uncertainty, Media Coverage of New and Controversial Science. And if there's anything that we have in the social sciences, it is uncertainty. And this book makes several suggestions that I think are not necessarily the things that you would always think of. I mean, the obvious things to me are keep your writing short, things like that, keep it short, keep it pithy. But one thing that this author talks about is asking yourself, are your results counterintuitive? Do they contradict lay understandings of an idea? So do your results find that, for instance, it's fairly well established in educational research that, retention and grade is not necessarily good for student achievement. In fact, it exacerbates the problems of dropout rates. Well, that's a very counterintuitive notion. When I talk about that to my students, they're like, no way. I mean, why would you pass along to somebody who didn't know the material? They're sort of thinking in the back of their minds, well, if at first you don't succeed, try and try again. And so I think a lot of stuff in educational research is like that. People have been to school for 13 years or more, and they have their own opinions, and there are a lot of lay theories about it. And so if you have a finding that contradicts those lay theories, This essay talks about, or this book chapter talks about, acknowledging the lay theory. So if you're writing an op-ed, for instance, about your counterintuitive finding, acknowledge. You know, it would seem to make sense that, yeah, if you retain somebody in grade, they're going to, practice makes perfect and they're going to do better the next year. Well, and say that, that has apparent merit. So, say that makes sense. That makes sense. Then use evidence from your study to create dissatisfaction with that theory. And then demonstrate how your theories or findings better explain the phenomenon. So that's one thing I thought was interesting. Some of the other suggestions come from my own experience as a reporter. One of the important things that I try to tell people at CU is don't discount the local media. I think a lot of professors, they read the New York Times, they read, maybe Inside Higher Ed, they read the national publications. And they see the local newspaper and like, this is such a rag, the local TV is so stupid, it's all about car crashes. Well, first of all, you're much more likely to be mentioned in the local rag or on the local TV station than you are to be mentioned in the New York Times. The New York Times gets a lot more op-eds probably than your local paper. And second of all, there are a lot of people in your community who do read those publications or watch that TV station. And if you want to make a difference in your community, I think it's important not to discount those voices. The final piece of advice I'm going to leave you with is try to act as your own PR person. Don't assume that university communications is going to put your name out there and put your work out there, and certainly don't assume that reporters will read educational research journals like they do in the life and physical sciences, because again, educational reporters don't. Practice twittering, write a blog, submit op-eds on your own, and advocate for yourself. So that's my head.
Hi, I'm Scott Jacek, and I want to start by saying I really like this meeting. I get a ton of ideas. I think